I sat in the waiting room of UC Health, clutching my bag so tightly that my knuckles ached. The hum of vending machines and the faint antiseptic smell made the place feel both sterile and suffocating. Elias had been called in a few minutes earlier, his shoulders slumped, his steps uneven. To anyone watching, he looked fragile, a man weighed down by illness. To me, he was my brother, the only family I had left. I tried to focus on the pages of an old magazine, but my mind kept circling back to the weeks of worry, the nights when he barely touched his food, the mornings he seemed confused about where he was. I had told myself it was depression, maybe something more serious, but still something we could face together. That was why I had insisted on this appointment. When the nurse tapped my shoulder and asked me to follow her, my stomach dropped. I thought I was being called in to help explain his symptoms or fill out paperwork. Instead, she led me into a small office with a window overlooking the hospital parking lot. Dr. Marjorie Klein was waiting, her expression steady, almost too calm. "Leona," she began, her voice low but firm, "you need to protect yourself from Elias." For a second, I didn't understand the words. Protect myself from Elias. She must have been mistaken. I opened my mouth to protest, but she raised a hand gently, stopping me before I could speak. Her eyes, sharp with memory, told me she was certain. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Every instinct I had, the one that had always told me to defend him, to stand by him, suddenly felt fragile. The role I had carried since childhood cracked in that moment, and nothing felt steady anymore. I gripped the edge of the chair, bracing myself as she leaned closer, ready to tell me more. The moment Dr. Klein's words hit me, my mind pulled backward, dragging me through years I thought I had long tucked away. I was 6 when our parents died in a car accident just outside Cincinnati. Elias was 8, and in a single night we went from children with a family to siblings clinging to each other in a world of strangers. Foster homes came and went like passing seasons. Sometimes we were together, sometimes separated. But whenever I found myself in a strange bed or at a new school, I kept the image of Elias close his hand gripping mine in that police station lobby, promising me we'd be okay. He wasn't perfect, even then. He picked fights with other boys, stole candy bars when he thought no one was looking. But to me, he was protector and brother, the person who made the shifting ground beneath us bearable. I was small, quiet, bookish. He was louder, rougher, ready to take the hit if it meant keeping me safe. That bond settled into my bones and never left. By the time we aged out of the system, I knew I had to build stability, if only to prove to myself that the chaos wouldn't win. I enrolled in college, worked part-time jobs, and carved out a path in social work. Elias tried too, for a while. He enrolled at a community college, talked about getting a degree in business, but it fizzled. He dropped out, cycled through jobs in warehouses and repair shops, always one step away from trouble, always promising me he'd figure it out. And I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was the younger sibling who had grown up thinking my survival depended on his strength. That belief became a habit, one I carried into adulthood without realizing. Sitting in Dr. Klein's office, the echo of our shared scars felt heavier than ever. Maybe I wasn't protecting him anymore. Maybe I was protecting an idea of him that had never truly existed. Her silence pressed against me, waiting, and I braced myself for what she was about to reveal next. After that day at the hospital, I tried to shove Dr. Klein's warning to the back of my mind, but life with Elias made it impossible to ignore. At first, his detachment was subtle, almost easy to dismiss. He would forget where he'd left his keys or repeat a story he had already told me the night before. I chalked it up to stress, maybe the fog of depression, and told myself it was nothing to worry about. But the lapses grew. I'd find him sitting on the couch long after the television had gone dark, staring at the blank screen as though it were still alive. He started missing shifts at his job at the distribution center. Then came the call from his supervisor, explaining they couldn't keep him on. I told myself I would help him get back on his feet, but weeks stretched into months, and I was the one paying his rent, covering his phone bill, making sure the lights stayed on. The weight of it pressed harder each day. Yet I couldn't let go of the belief that this was just an illness, that my brother was still in there somewhere, waiting to surface once he got better. That hope blinded me to what was happening right under my nose. One Friday, I stopped at the bank to withdraw cash for groceries. The screen flashed a balance far lower than it should have been. Confused, I logged into my online account later that evening. Several withdrawals had been made over the past 2 weeks, each at ATMs across town. I never made them. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself not to jump to conclusions. Then, items began to vanish. My laptop, a necklace our mother had given me before the accident. At first, I wondered if I'd misplaced them, but deep down, I knew better. Each time I looked at Elias, slouched in his chair, muttering about headaches or lost sleep, the seed of suspicion in me grew. I wanted to believe he was sick. I wanted to believe I wasn't losing him to something else entirely. And yet the pieces were shifting, pointing toward a truth I was terrified to name. I couldn't stop replaying the strange withdrawals from my account, the empty spaces on my shelves where my things used to be. Still, every time Elias groaned about his headaches or stared off blankly, my guilt shoved the doubts back down. I told myself he was sick, that I was overreacting. That's what younger sisters do, they defend, even when it hurts. But Dr. Klein wasn't done with me. A week after the hospital visit, she called and asked me to come in alone. My chest tightened as I sat across from her in the same office, blinds half closed against the morning sun. She leaned forward, fingers folded, her voice steady but heavy with intent. "Leona, I didn't want to overwhelm you that day, but you need the full truth. I treated your brother years ago in the ER. He came in with a deep cut on his leg after an altercation with a woman. Later, I learned she was his ex. She had accused him of stealing her jewelry and draining her accounts. He was charged with fraud. He claimed he was sick, that his memory was failing him, but the evidence told a different story." Her words landed like blows. I shook my head, the air catching in my throat. "No, that doesn't sound like Elias." He wouldn't. But my protest trailed off, caught on fragments of memory. Elias telling me he'd lost a job because of mix-ups that never made sense. The time he swore his paycheck had been short, only for me to discover later he'd spent the money elsewhere. The way he would exaggerate aches and pains, especially when bills came due. Dr. Klein watched me closely. "I can't force you to believe me, but patterns repeat. Be careful." I left her office feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath me. My brother's sickness had seemed tragic, even sympathetic. But now, every symptom I had taken at face value flickered in my mind like a trick of light, possibly staged. At home that evening, Elias was sprawled on the couch, eyes half closed, complaining of dizziness. I studied him, searching for truth in the lines of his face, and found only shadows that deepened my unease. The doubts clawed at me until I couldn't breathe. Every word Dr. Klein had said echoed through my head, colliding with every excuse I'd made for Elias. I needed to know for certain, one way or another. That was when I ordered a set of small security cameras online. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a cheap crime show, but desperation made the decision for me. When they arrived, I placed them where he wouldn't notice, one above the front door, one tucked between books on the shelf in the living room, and another angled toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. I told myself it was for my peace of mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew I was searching for proof of something I didn't want to admit. For the first few nights, the recordings were uneventful. Elias stayed on the couch, barely moving except to shuffle into the kitchen for water. I almost convinced myself I'd made a mistake, but on the fourth night, the footage shattered that illusion. At 2 in the morning, Elias rose from the couch with steady legs, no tremors, no staggering. He moved quickly to my bedroom, slipped inside, and emerged with the leather case where I kept my mother's necklace. My heart pounded as I watched him shove it into his pocket. Then, as if this were routine, he pulled on his jacket and left the apartment. The camera at the door caught him returning just before dawn. Empty-handed, his steps light, his expression smug in a way I had never seen before. The same pattern repeated a few nights later, this time with my laptop. He carried it out tucked under his arm, walking as confidently as ever. I sat frozen in front of the playback, nausea climbing my throat. The man I'd defended, the brother I had clung to through foster care, wasn't sick, he was stealing from me. Every groan, every blank stare, every trembling hand had been a performance. When Elias came home that evening and sank into the couch, muttering about dizziness, I couldn't look at him the same way. The betrayal was no longer a whisper of doubt. It was real, undeniable, and staring me in the face. I waited until the evidence weighed so heavily on me that I could no longer carry it in silence. The necklace, the laptop, the withdrawals, those weren't accidents or misunderstandings. They were choices, and I needed to hear him admit it, even if it broke me. That evening, I stood in the doorway of the living room, the camera remote clenched in my hand. Elias was stretched out on the couch, pretending to nap, one arm thrown over his eyes. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. His arm slid away, and his eyes flickered open, slow and deliberate. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you," I pressed, my words trembling. "The cameras, the pawn shop trips, the way you walk just fine when you think I'm not looking." For a beat, silence filled the room. Then he sat up, shaking his head with a bitter laugh. "I'm sick, Leona. Sick, and you're spying on me. Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" His voice cracked in just the right places, like he was rehearsing lines he'd used before. But I saw it then, the glint in his eyes, the sharpness in his tone beneath the practiced weakness. It wasn't sorrow. It was strategy. My chest tightened as tears spilled over. "You're lying to me. You've been lying this whole time." He leaned forward, reaching out like he could reel me back into the role I'd always played, the loyal sister. "I'm all you have, Leona. Don't turn on me now." I jerked away, my heart tearing in two. After he stormed off to his room, slamming the door, I collapsed at the kitchen table, the weight of love and betrayal pressed so heavily I could barely breathe. But through the grief, resolve took root. If I didn't protect myself now, I never would. I wiped my eyes, opened my laptop, and began compiling every piece of evidence I had. The night after our confrontation, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his words, "I'm all you have, Leona." It was true in one sense, but it was also a chain he'd wrapped around my neck. By morning, my fear had hardened into something else resolve. I called Adrian, the only person I trusted outside of Elias. He came over with his laptop and a yellow legal pad, his calm presence a sharp contrast to the storm inside me. I showed him the footage, the bank statements, and the pawn shop receipts I'd managed to track down. He said little at first, just took notes, his pen scratching steadily as the evidence piled higher. Finally, he looked up. "Leona, this is more than just bad behavior. This is fraud. If you sit on it, he'll do it again to you or someone else." The truth of his words cut deeper than any guilt I carried. Together, we organized the files, time-stamped everything, and arranged the video clips into a timeline. When it was ready, I drove us downtown to the police station, gripping the wheel until my hands ached. Inside, I laid everything on the desk of a detective named Ramirez. He raised an eyebrow at first, but as Adrian clicked through the footage, his skepticism shifted to grim focus. "We've had a string of reports like this," Ramirez said finally. "Your brother's name has come up before, but nothing stuck. This time, this might be enough." Hearing that was both relief and devastation. Elias wasn't just hurting me. He was repeating the same cycle he'd spun for years. I nodded, my throat tight, and signed the statement they placed in front of me. By the time I left the station, the weight on my shoulders had changed. It was no longer just fear. It was the knowledge that justice was in motion, and there was no going back. 2 days after meeting with the detectives, the knock came at my door. My heart lurched into my throat as I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing there, their presence heavy with finality. I stepped aside silently, my hands trembling as they entered the apartment. Elias was on the couch, draped in a blanket. His head tilted back as though even lifting it required effort. He looked up lazily, then frowned when he saw the uniforms. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice raspy, rehearsed weakness lacing every word. "Elias Harrow," one officer said firmly. "You're under arrest for fraud and theft." The moment froze. Elias sat upright faster than I'd seen him move in months. His eyes darted to me, wide and sharp, the mask slipping just enough for me to glimpse the truth. "Leona," he stammered. Tell them I'm sick." I couldn't speak at first. My throat felt locked shut, but I forced the words out. I gave them the proof. "Elias, I know what you did." For a split second, something flickered across his face, panic, raw and unguarded. The officers moved in, cuffing his wrists, reading his rights. He tried to twist the story, claiming depression had driven him to mistakes, but the performance fell flat against the weight of the evidence. I stood by the doorway, trembling as they guided him past me. He turned once, eyes narrowing, searching for the sister who used to defend him no matter what. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The door shut behind them, leaving the apartment in heavy silence. My legs gave out, and I sank into a chair, shaking from the enormity of what had just unfolded. He was gone, taken not by illness, but by his own choices. For the first time, I wasn't carrying his burden anymore. Yet, as relief trickled through me, it tangled with grief, leaving me unsure which feeling would last longer. Months passed in a blur of hearings, paperwork, and quiet evenings that felt far too empty. Elias sat in county jail awaiting trial, and though I hadn't seen him since the arrest, his shadow lingered in every corner of my life. Some mornings I woke expecting to hear his footsteps in the kitchen. Other nights I lay awake, guilt gnawing at me, wondering if I had abandoned him or finally saved myself. To keep from unraveling, I poured myself into my social work program. I stayed late at the library, buried in case studies and field reports, telling myself that if I could help others climb out of broken cycles, then maybe I could climb out of mine. It wasn't easy. The ache of betrayal clung to me, but at least I was moving forward. Adrian became the steady hand I hadn't realized I needed. He checked in often, sometimes with notes of encouragement slipped under my door, other times with a simple coffee left on my desk before class. He never pushed me to talk, but when I did, he listened without judgment. His quiet presence reminded me that not everyone used trust as a weapon. Slowly, I began to recognize something I had never allowed myself before. I didn't have to be defined by Elias's choices. I wasn't just his younger sister, his caretaker, or his shield. I was Leona, a woman capable of building a life that belonged only to me. The realization was fragile, but it was mine, and I held on to it as the trial drew closer, knowing that whatever the verdict, I could no longer go back to the role I had once played. The trial came and went with a kind of grim efficiency. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap, listening as the evidence was laid out: the pawn slips, the bank records, the video footage. Elias barely looked at me. When the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts of fraud and theft, I felt no triumph, only a strange mixture of sorrow and release. The brother I had defended for so long was gone, though maybe he had been gone long before that day. Afterward, I needed something that grounded me. I found myself volunteering at a foster youth program downtown, sitting with kids who carried the same kind of scars I once did, listening to their stories, helping them with homework. Simply being steady in their lives reminded me of who I wanted to be. It gave purpose to the pieces of myself that Elias had nearly broken. Adrian remained by my side through it all. One evening, after a long shift at the center, he walked me to my car and, almost shyly, asked if I would like to have dinner with him. There was no pressure in his voice, just a quiet sincerity that made me pause. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the reflex to guard myself. I felt ready. That night, as I drove home with his invitation lingering in my mind, I realized something I should have known all along. Family isn't only blood. Family is the people who stay, the ones who honor trust rather than exploit it. I breathed deeply, the weight finally lifting, and stepped into the first chapter of a life that was wholly my own.